dogs had to suffer to make these changes. Welcome back. I wanted to give you guys a little bit of an update. So I talked about a local case that was going on a little bit back. I didn't really talk about the case. I talked about kind of the fallout from it from the public, but I wanted to give you guys a little bit of an update on it. It is commonly known as the Chandler55 case. It was a hoarding case, kind of an animal cruelty case here in Phoenix area. There was a lot of issues surrounding it because a woman was posing as a rescue for special needs animals, and she was reaching out to shelters and other rescues who had special needs animals, offering to take them into her rescue and care for them. And come to find out, she is not a rescue. She was not taking care of these animals. They were in terrible condition, and it took a long time for her to be exposed and to get legal action on this and criminal action on this. And a big part of the reason why was because of the way the law is written in Chandler, which is where she lived. So it was under Chandler's jurisdiction. So people were very upset with local organizations, like even not Chandler, but outside of Chandler, for not taking action against this woman. And a lot of it is because of the law and the way things are written and how jurisdiction works for certain cases. Those animals were removed from her home. She still has a trial pending. There have been multiple hearings regarding whether or not she could get animals back potentially. And so all of the animals have been returned to their rescues or have found rescue. She is not going to get them back at all. Those are all the hearings that have happened so far. She hasn't had a criminal trial yet. The reason for that is because they were trying to find more evidence and more things that they could do and figure out which charges to bring for what things. So whether things are felonies or misdemeanors, what level of those things to bring against her. I believe she is still in jail at this point. She was out on bond a couple times, but now she is in jail, I believe, and they are waiting to start her trial. So I will leave links to local news coverage of that case if you want to read more about it. It is very sad. Thankfully, she will not be getting any of these animals back. She will not be able to be around animals at the very least, depending on what happens with her criminal case. Who knows what could happen with that, but at this point when she's out on bail, if she does get out on bail again, she should not be around any animals, and that would worsen her charges. It had a happy ending for the most part. Unfortunately, some animals had passed in her care and needed to be euthanized when they were removed from the home, so she did do a lot of damage to these animals. Public outrage around it was really strong, and that has luckily led the Chandler government and the Arizona government at large to make some amends to their animal cruelty laws. We're gonna look at the changes that they're making to their animal cruelty laws. And this is actually a change to the state law. I know Chandler, the city of Chandler, is making some changes as well, but I believe that this is the state law regarding animal cruelty. And so I will pull up the original law. Basically what it does is to further define what they mean by proper shelter, care, food, water, things like that. So it's really going to hone in on specifics. It's less subjective when they come across a case like this. And I will put all these links down below so you can look at them yourself as well. They have a lot of jargon in this original law, the way it stands now, that this is what it means for a person to commit cruelty to animals. And it says intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly subjecting an animal to cruel neglect or abandonment. What does that mean? It's pretty subjective what constitutes as cruel neglect or abandonment. Obviously, abandonment is a little more objective, but neglect can be a range of things depending on who you talk to. Number 2 in this says fails to provide medical attention necessary to prevent protracted suffering. In one of her original trials of whether or not she could get any of the animals back, they had veterinary professionals there to provide their insight, and because they're medical professionals, that carries a lot of weight. That one is a little bit more subject to a professional expert opinion. Providing medical attention could be as little as going to the vet, not even agreeing to treatment. And that was a big thing in her case too, is that maybe she went to the vet, but she didn't do anything to act on their recommendations or anything to treat the animal's issues, stop their suffering or stop their pain. And so that is kind of a big hole when you look at what does it mean to provide medical attention, like what level. Again, down here we talk about cruel mistreatment. What does that mean? We all have ideas about what that means in our head, but it's not written in the law exactly what that means. A lot of these holes are where it makes it difficult to take action, especially for the police or any law enforcement, because there is no definite definition of these things. They could fight it and say, well, there's no definition of what this means, so I'm not doing that. With the law, you want to be as objective as possible. There's no language in here to make it not objective. It's all open-ended and subject to opinion. And down here they have a little bit of a definition for cruel mistreatment, which means torture or inflict unnecessary physical injury on an animal. Cruel neglect means to fail to provide an animal with food, water, or shelter. That's really all they have. A big thing about it is that she wouldn't allow these special needs animals to have wheelchairs and things like that. Could you make the argument that her not allowing that is intentionally inflicting serious injury because they all had very serious wounds of not being able to use those tools? So rubbing injuries down to the bone, raw wounds and things like that, because they weren't being bandaged, they weren't allowed to use wheelchairs and things like that. So you could make the argument that that was an intentional infliction of physical injury. All these things are not defined the way they should be to bring serious change for these animals and, criminal repercussions for her. When we pull up the new proposed revisions, they really go into depth about defining a lot of these things, and you can really tell that they are thinking about this case specifically. So the only change they made to a failure to treat was to prevent unreasonable suffering instead of protracted suffering. Okay, so protracted here would mean lasting for a long time or longer than expected. Again, that's pretty subjective. What is a long time to be suffering from something? Someone could argue that protracted is like months and months. Someone could argue protracted is days. And someone could argue that is years. Relies on a vet's expert opinion about what is protracted for a specific injury or illness. Changing it to be unreasonable would be any person would consider suffering from this injury or illness for any length of time to be unreasonable. Again, this is like if you have a wound and you don't get it treated like right away, any length of time after that it's not treated is unreasonable. That really goes a long way to defining it a little bit more. I think they could, make a little bit more changes to medical attention, what that means. What lengths do we go to for medical attention? Like going to a vet to get it seen doesn't constitute medical attention, like it needs treatment. They could have done a little bit more with that. There might be more changes in the future, but I think that is still a hole that they need to fill, in my opinion. At least changing that from protracted to unreasonable makes it so that they can bring charges and get change for animals in situations more quickly. Now, the bulk of the changes are coming down at the bottom, and they're basically defining cruel neglect. And so if you remember, cruel neglect, they had defined as providing an animal with necessary food, water, and shelter. They've changed it to say they need all of the following, not just the necessary. They need food given daily that's appropriate and fit for consumption, and water that is suitable for drinking. So a big part of this case was that when the officers went to seize the animals, they would find food that was not suitable, water that was dirty with feces in it. It's not fit for consumption. And so they're really changing this to be like, they need clean water, they need fresh food, not that's been sitting out forever in the Arizona heat that maybe has like bugs and stuff in it and feces in it as well. They talk about shelter, structurally sound, maintained, in good repair. The animal is able to lay down in a natural manner and maintain normal body temperature. Bedding material that protects the dog from weather conditions, has adequate ventilation and drainage. So a lot of the animals in this case had, again, wounds because they're special needs. They can't move a lot of them were what we call down and hind, which means they don't have the use of their hind legs. And so what that means is they would go potty and then not be able to move out of it. And so they would just be sitting in their feces and urine, and that is going to cause even more issues outside of what they already have from like rubbing or anything like that. So there was no like drainage or anything to allow that to be swept away, so they would not be sitting in it if they didn't move out of it in some way. Dogs don't super sweat, but they still trap moisture from their body. And so if they're just laying in one place, trapping all that moisture, that's gonna create issues as well, just like bed sores. Again, all of this is really good definition that we didn't have before. We just said shelter. What does that mean? Anyone could define shelter as anything. One of the other things they put in here was regarding extreme weather conditions. And obviously living in Arizona, we do have extreme weather conditions. It's not a mild climate, a temperature range that they need to abide by. So if the outdoor temperature is below 32 degrees or above 100 degrees, make changes for that. So they need to have adequate ways for them to avoid those temperature changes and not have issues regarding those. So they have to be not exposed to heat exhaustion. So they also have, if a heat advisory has been issued, which is almost every day in the summer in Arizona, I feel like they really don't have an excuse to not be protecting these animals outside from the elements. Other things we have, like they've included here, are monsoons. So if a warning has been issued for those, they need to protect them adequately with adequate shelter. I think the thing that's gonna go a long way too is the heat, because a lot of these animals were kept outside a lot of the time. And the ones that did pass on her property, there's not really a way to know why, but it could very well have been heat exposure. You can't really get away from that because you have a backup way to measure that, and it's not subjective. And then I think what is also going to go a really long way is to say, maintained in a manner that minimizes the risk of disease, infestation, or parasites. And this is a huge thing with hoarders that I think is going to come to bear for a lot of them, is that the shelter that you find a lot of these animals in is often very dirty, not well maintained, is usually outside, so there's a lot of tracking of things everywhere. And so you're going to get parasites, you're going to get infestations of things, and that's going to lead to a lot of diseases and infections. And so this section right here is going to go, I think, a long way to future prosecution in situations like this, because I don't think a lot of people who are in a similar situation like this that get arrested or, their animals get seized, they don't think about cleanliness, obviously, but they don't think about the repercussions that cleanliness has on the animals. And so even if you're not talking special needs animals, just animals in general, you're not going to see them being concerned about fleas or lice or ringworm or anything like that. And they're just going to let it fester. And so having this as kind of a backup to be like, even if they cleaned up their act right before they got inspected or anything like that, the animals' bodies are going to tell you if there is something there that they're all suffering from. I can say this from experience. When I worked on a hoarding case before, literally every animal in that house had ringworm. You can make the argument that they neglected these animals to the point of a severe ringworm infection. That's where that would come in. So I think a lot of this is like really good changes. I think it's going to make a huge difference. I don't really know what this is going to have to bear on her case. Is unfortunate. Dogs had to suffer to make these changes that I feel like should have been, defined at the onset, but this is a change that we need, and it is going to go a long way to prosecuting these things in the future. I'm going to leave this one here, and then I will be also doing another video about some other laws that are taking effect in 2024 that I thought would be interesting to cover. So look for that video in the future. Let me know down below what you think. Let me know if you see any other holes that you think could be fixed. And let me know if you have any cruelty laws in your area that you think could benefit from changes like this, or that you think could also inform these changes as well. What I really feel passionately about is, you know, transparency, and I err on the side of, you know, more description and more clarifiers, the better, because then you don't really have anywhere to hide. I think there could be more done here, but I think what they have done is going to go a really long way to making serious change for animals in this state going forward. Again, let me know any thoughts you have down below. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.